now.
अब तक तो दिख
Yes,
नहीं रहा है पेज के ऊपर.
yes, we are live. Uh, Thank you so much, everyone who has joined us today for Democracy Samvaad. This is a weekly webinar that Indian School of Democracy does, and every week we invite some speakers who talk about politics and multiple facets of politics. This is hosted by Indian School of Democracy, which aims to nurture principled grassroots political leaders. And we have several programs like Democracy Express, She Represents, and the recently ones that we have launched, the Good Politician program. So I'll cut that, and our link and everything will be posted on the live video, so you can know more about our work. And I'll come to our two speakers today, and I think they both are more than speakers to us. Both Venkat and Tara have been like the pillars of support for Indian School of Democracy. So I'll begin with the person who has been a very close mentor to me for past 7 8 years or maybe more, Venkat Krishnan. He has been a very very close anchor, and I think today what we are doing at Indian School of Democracy, a lot of credit goes to him, because he has been one anchor who has pushed us to think and ask us troubling and difficult questions. As a background, Venkat started Give India before that Eklavya School, and just now I think in the last decade his strong focus has been to promote a culture of giving in this country, and he's one of the volunteers, anchor volunteers behind Daan Utsav movement. Just now, he also has set up India Welfare Trust, within he promotes like people who are trying to do something which is out of box, and in small ways he supports them, and also a big person behind a lot of voluntary move work that is being done in the country. The other speaker today is Tara, who I think I have been completely inspired by her in the last 2 years. I've known her, and she co-founded Shakti, a group that is promoting and making sure that more and more women join politics. I think one of the core demand of Shakti is to 50% women legislation in all the places wherein women can represent. So other thing that she founded was Citizens for Bangalore, one of the co-founders for that. So thank you so much, Tara and Venkat, both of us joining us. Tara, you have been one amazing support for I think the entire team. And every time when we struggle or want to understand deeply about local politics, I think you are the person we go to. So thank you for taking out time and doing this. I will give it over to Venkat to begin the conversation and take it forward. Thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Thanks, Prakash. So, hi everyone. Delighted to get into this conversation. My primary goal is going to be to ask as many questions to Tara as I can today. Uh, my mind is, of course, full with a lot and lot of questions, but I'm sure many of you who are listening in also will have questions. So, if you have your questions, feel free to share them on the ISD Facebook page where this live chat is being broadcast, and we'll make sure that we'll prioritize your questions over mine, because I can always catch up with Tara offline later. But Tara, to get this kick started, the question that I asked you on mail, which has been troubling me for a while. We have all these other forms of political alignments, right? You have Dalit parties, you have Yadav parties, you have upper caste parties, you have minority parties, you have all kinds of parties. And interestingly, I think in India now, if you get 40% of the vote, you will sweep the elections across anywhere. And women are almost for 50% of this country, unfortunately, almost. Uh, why is it that we don't have a party which says women's issues is our top priority and key priority? Not to say that we'll ignore everything else, but can we, in one generation or in one set of one term, dramatically transform rights for women in this country? And why is there no party that makes that their central poll plank and try to get that 40%, 45% vote share? Why has that not happened?
Thanks, Venkat, and thanks, Indian School of Democracy, for hosting this. These are very interesting questions, and unfortunately, unlike numerics, there is no perfect answer to these questions. Part of the reason is because we don't have an experience of this having happened and either succeeded or failed or partially succeeded to draw from and say, this is what happened and this is exactly why it fizzled out. So we have to deconstruct some of what has already happened, exactly like what you mentioned, Venkat, like going back to the politics of, say, caste or the politics of religion, and say, why does that work and this doesn't work, right? So if you look at not just India, but anywhere in the world, there are cause-based and identity-based politics. For example, there are green parties in many multi-party setups. There are anti-apartheid parties in many parts of the world, right? They may not be called anti-apartheid, but that was the platform on which they were founded. But you don't find gender identity-based parties anywhere in the world, right? And occasionally you have these women's parties that spring up and die without, making even a little flutter, right? So what you're asking, which is why isn't gender equality across the spectrum the main plank of any party? And this other observation that gender as an identity for political parties are very intrinsically connected, right? And it has to do with the vote, basically. A political formation is constructed basis the available vote, not necessarily what you can secure, right? Basis the available vote. So there are two reasons in India why political formations are constructed. One is, and I'm talking from a vote perspective, right? I'm not talking from any other kind of perspective, any other motivation. So the primary reason a party exists is for the vote. And if you look at the way parties construct themselves around the vote, either you construct a party around a large enough available base so you can win, like you said, you can get that 30, 35, 40% of the vote and you can actually win the election, or you get that 10, 15% of the share where you become the kingmaker, right? One of the two. So you
Hopefully
have a
queen maker, yeah.
Or a queen maker, right? So you either have small parties that are identify themselves with slivers, whether it is minority oriented, religious minority orientation, or a caste minority orientation. You have Dalit parties, you have Yadav parties, like you said, or you have large enough bases like International Congress, which is somewhat more centrist. Therefore, you expect that there is a large enough base of voters you can cover. Or a Hindutva plank-based party where you have, say, 75, 80% of the population. That is the available base, not that you will get it, right? So, and that is, you look at the classic, I think the almost like a textbook example of this is the Dravidian parties in Tamil Nadu, where upper caste, especially so-called Brahmin vote is about 3%. And you add up all the upper castes, it maybe comes up to 10%. So you really have 90% of the vote base left for you, which is why two parties are able to get into a dual party kind of a system, because you're looking at a large available vote base. But to your question, the minute you segregate that vote base by gender, you have now reduced it effectively to a point where even if you get half of that half, it is too small to win. Meaning you can have a niche party, but you cannot have something that wants to win the election. So I'll let you figure that out or ask me a question that leads on. But basically what I'm saying is that every party, whether it is a sliver of a vote or a large section of the vote, is aiming for the whole available vote base within that spectrum. All the Yadavs, all the Dalits, all the Hindus, all the Muslims, that kind of a vote base. Nobody is saying I will have that anywhere in the world.
Correct. But I'm just saying that, all the women is 48% vote share, right? And 48% vote share will get you at least 400 seats in the parliament.
Correct. So that brings us to the question or the assumption that all women will vote a certain way, right? All women will vote a certain way. If you look at the largest vote banks, like the backward caste, non-forward caste vote banks in Tamil Nadu, which comes to 90%, you're talking about 30, 35%, 40% winning vote, right? That's all you can get, right? Not even half.
But that's because there are two parties, right? There is DMK and ADMK, which are both going after the same voter base.
Correct.
So right now, there is not even one party going after the women's voter base.
Correct. So then let's look at the Hindutva vote. Then look at the Hindutva vote. There are no two parties contesting the Hindutva vote nationally. But getting 37% is unheard of, right? Currently, the sitting government has 37% of the vote, which isn't even barely half of the Hindutva vote bank. Now, For a
Right.
second, assume that they went only after the men of the Hindutva vote bank. You're talking about half of 37%. Even if they performed as well, they would get half of 37%.
Possibly, one doesn't know. I mean, it's, the assumption that the entire Hindu vote is a Hindutva vote is, of course,
Which is the same assumption that we are making, which is
right.
that the
So
entire
that's the next question.
go
So
on.
why would you say that all women will not be part of one singular vote bank, especially if the focus is very, very clear that these are the basic rights that women need to have, and this is what we will ensure, and everything else we will do normal stuff. Uh, would you then argue that there are women out there who think some other issue is more important to them than gender issue right now? So whether it be caste, whether it be religion, whether it be
Something else.
employment, whether it's
Economy, yeah.
economy, etc. Uh, is it is your point that it won't be possible to rally women? In a sense, if you look at the 2014 election, rightly or wrongly, the election was primarily contested on an anti-corruption platform.
Yeah,
Right.
correct.
And it was possible to rally the entire nation around that one issue.
When you're talking entire nation, you're still talking less than that 37%. You're talking somewhat like 32% or 30%.
True, but I'm saying that predominantly it became the primary electoral plank.
Correct.
Right? So I'm saying making gender as an primarily electoral plank and going hammer and tongs after that. And let's say you might even be right and that you will get 50% of that 45%, which means you land up with 22% vote share.
At most.
That will easily make you a kingmaker.
Correct.
And by far the second largest party.
Correct.
Right? And any one party getting 22% and not winning is going to make sure that the winning party is unlikely to get a full simple majority.
Correct. You can be a spoiler, key spoiler as well.
Massive,
disruptor. Yeah.
Why is even that not being tried?
So great question. So I think we agree that at any point, if you divide on gender, you're taking an available base and dividing it into half, right? Any available base. I think that's agreeable. Second, we also agree that one can't expect all women to vote a certain way, just like all Hindus don't vote a certain way, all Muslims don't vote a certain way.
True.
Votes don't happen like that. So the maximum available base for you then is 48%. And on any available base, be it a Yadav, be it a Dalit, be it a Hindu, getting even half that available base is rocket science, essentially, right? So it's a very, very difficult thing. But your question is, if it exists, why aren't we even trying to go after it? Because there is the potential to accomplish it, right? Okay, so now we've also said that worldwide there aren't gender-based parties. So it is not a question of an identity crisis in India. Worldwide, the gender identity as the primary political identity is an experiment that is as yet untried. While women have organized and women have been organized for various causes, from the environment. If you look at the RTI in India, it was a women-led and wholly women-staffed movement, right? From anti-dam movements to RTI movements to the recent, even the farmers' protests. There's a lot of women sitting there, right? So it is not that women don't rally, and it is not that women don't rally for causes that aren't intrinsically gender-based, like when the Nirbhaya incident happened, right? Or non-gender-based causes as well. So all of that is possible. So the question is, why isn't a political mobilization of the same thing happening towards the vote? So the vote, that brings us to understanding the vote itself, right? The vote is a very emotional thing. Right? That is something that we've got to understand. And the reason that parties worldwide campaign a certain way is because they realize it is that last 48 hours before the vote that is crucial. In fact, if there are skeptics, all you need to do is to look at the Bihar elections and look at phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And you will see that phase 1 went a certain way. Phase 2 kind of turned against phase 1. And phase 3 entirely swung the opposite way of phase 1. Which tells you just the campaigns between phase 2 and phase 3, how much effect they had, right? Whatever happened between phase 2 and phase 3 swung. So the vote is that emotional, and you're talking about large mass of people swinging. You're not talking about individuals swinging. And vote is last minute. So that again, I go back to between phase 2 and phase 3, whatever happened, swung the vote. And we have seen this in many, many instances, right? So when we say the vote is emotional, that means that it is not pegged to a single thing. Even if you want the Hindutva vote, you have to keep ratcheting up the emotion up until the election, pretty much the last campaign date. Even if you want a vote based on a particular caste issue, you've got to do that. And anyone who's organized, anyone who's a campaign organizer, whether it is political or non-political, knows that the same triggers don't always work. Let's take a gruesome example, right? The rape incidents that happen. They happen every day in India. Some of them are reported every day in media, but every day you don't see protests on the street, right? It is not like any one of them can be in any way rationalized more than the other. Nevertheless, some incidents trigger mass emotion. So there is that trick of triggering mass emotion that decides the vote. And so, like you said, Venkat, there are women who strongly believe in gender justice and yet vote towards employment because they place that as practically more important. This is true for men too. It is not unique for women. Or they may place, their roads. There is a recent flood that happened, right? And maybe they lost their belongings, or the migrant crisis. There are so many things that go into the vote, that it is not one specific issue that does that. In fact, you brought up the anti-corruption, that's exactly what happened. There was a ratcheting up of the anti-corruption issue to, a shrill voice, if you will, so that it almost like everything in India became about corruption versus anti-corruption, when there were indeed very many more things. For example, NREGA had been introduced in that term, and that transformed lives, pulled millions of people out of poverty. It didn't get any bonus points. Instead, anti-corruption became the rallying cry. If you actually put both together and see, you ask yourself, do these positives not count for anything, right? And yet the vote is emotional.
But therefore, exactly the same thing, right? I mean, and like you said, I mean, there are a lot of women who are active in the forefront of various social issues, right? And they're leading movements, and I think women are organized sometimes in far better ways than men. I mean, if you look at the 60 lakh self-help groups, women self-help groups, they alone have a potential voter base of 6 crore women across this country, right? And then on top of that, you add various other movements, you will have a much larger base. I'm saying, and I also think I can't understand why gender issues cannot be, I personally feel they can be far more emotional than corruption. Corruption is a rational issue, it's not an emotional issue, as much as some of the basic gender issues in this country are gender issues, right? So why is it not possible to build a party and build that election momentum around that? And like corruption became the only issue that dominated the discourse, bring that as the dominant discourse 2 months before an election, and then rest. Because at least in one party, in Aam Aadmi Party's case, we've seen that it is possible for somebody who was not even a party to win a state election within 6 months, right?
In fairness, it's a city state. It's not a state,
true.
Right? So, but your point is well made in that you can come out of nowhere.
Correct.
And getting this far is a unprecedented accomplishment.
So, I'm right now reading Obama's autobiography, and a few days back I posted this, that when he was 39, which was in 2001, I think, he actually almost gave up politics and he started thinking of what he will do after politics. And 8 years later, he was the president of the US.
Yeah.
Right. So
these things happen.
Unthinkable.
Yeah. Unthinkable.
How people can come out of nowhere and capture the imagination.
Correct. No, I think you're, in a sense, I would invert what you said. You're actually making a very rational point. It's not emotional in the sense that, is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? Is what we are trying to answer. The probability derives from history as well, as to what, of course, you can disrupt history, which is the point you're making. And certainly you can disrupt history. But looking at the past and looking worldwide, and the fact that in the thousands of years of human civilization and politics of one form or the other, whether it's autocratic, oligarchy, or it is democracy, you have not seen gender as an identity And again, I say this, male gender as an identity also hasn't been seen. In fact, you could argue that in India, it's way easier to build a male identity political outfit because patriarchy is so deep rooted. It's much easier to ratchet up those emotions, but they don't happen. As I said, you have to go back to anyone who's building a political party needs to see return on investment. And if you're going to take any base and cut it by a half, you're going to ask yourself, would I rather do caste and get the full X% of that base, or would I do 1/2 of that base, right? So I'm deconstructing it to say that is the logic by which it hasn't happened so far, not to say it cannot happen. The second, to your comment about gender atrocities and gender injustice can be extremely emotional, you're absolutely right. Which is why when something as gruesome as the Nirbhaya incident happened, not only did lakhs of women spontaneously, leaderlessly get on the street, we actually got laws changed. The same way with RTI, we got laws passed, right? The rape laws changed, RTI got passed. But the thing is that when you try to build a party based on this, then you have to make sure that the vote is not just based on an incident, a single incident that happened, but a current incident, and that current incident is applicable to as much of a base as possible. So if you look at the way political parties function, Dalit parties look for injustices to Dalit to build that emotion. If you look at a Hindutva party, they're actively seeking, they have a hammer in their hand and they're looking for nails, right? It might be immigrants who were denied the ability to seek asylum in India. It might be the opposite, Rohingyas in India, but they're looking for ways to keep ratcheting up that emotion, to keep it going. Now, just like you've made the post about, I made a post asking people to rate what they think are the worst atrocities on humanity, from genocide to riots to rapes and gang rapes to corruption. And you won't believe it, most people rated corruption higher than all of this. So you and I are thinking rationally when we believe that it's much more gruesome and it's much more unacceptable to have the worst atrocities or injustices against people because of any attributes of theirs, be it gender, be it caste, whatever, versus corruption. But survey after survey, not just informal things that arrive, say that people in India are much more moved emotionally by corruption than killing, than riots, than lynching, than rapes. Much more emotionally.
But I don't know whether it's just an issue of something as extreme as rapes, right? And the problem, the difference between, say, corruption and rapes is that corruption is an everyday issue, whereas rape, I mean, at a national level is an everyday issue, but at an individual
people don't
level,
see it in front of them.
Yeah, it's a periodic.
Yeah, they don't experience it personally.
Correct. But I'm saying that there are so many other forms of gender injustice that happen. I mean, it's not just rapes, right? Rapes is actually just the tip of the iceberg that you see below.
So that means that injustice, the base to which the injustice happens is the base that needs to become your primary vote bank.
Correct.
That's what it is.
But isn't that the entire 50% of women, or like almost 90% of those 50%?
It can be. It can be.
No, I'm asking,
they vote that
already
way.
In the sense that where is there? I mean, even in the well-to-do upper-class families, there is no gender justice at all.
Correct.
And this morning, when we had breakfast, it is always my sister or my mother who has to make it.
Correct.
Me making the breakfast.
In fact, in politics, one time there was a woman who ran for elections who got married into the royal family. Okay, so they are extremely well-to-do, and she is twice has been the mayor, and she ran for the MP elections in 2019. She lost. But the point that she was trying to make is that she did not have the autonomy of deciding to spend her wealth on the election. It's not like the entire wealth is going to be spent on one election. There's a certain portion. She's a royal family. They have plenty of money. She doesn't have the autonomy to decide. And she has 2 grown children. So she's not really young, right? Not like she doesn't have experience. Like I said, she's been twice the mayor of a city and very successful. And yet she didn't have the agency to decide to spend that money running on an election, like you said. So that's injustice. Her husband or her, the males in the family could have decided that for themselves anytime, but she doesn't have that agency for the money that she has. You're right that gender injustice pervades all, but Gender identity is not a unique identity. In India, you have thousands of years of caste-based identity. You have thousands of years of religion-based identity. Gender as an identity has not been developed, has not been, you must realize that politically you have to mobilize along an identity. It is not that whether an identity exists or not. For example, everybody who went to college has a certain identity. We've all been to college. We've been through college education, right? Or everybody who sits in who's in a city certainly has a distinct identity than the rural identity. Urban folk are completely different than rural folk. And we know that. All urban folk know that. All rural folk know that. But can you imagine all urban folk voting a certain way? No, not if you don't mobilize it. So fostering and mobilizing that identity is it has not happened overnight. Remember, you're not reacting to an injustice. You're fostering an identity. Those are two different things. When you react to anti-corruption, when you react to corruption, you're reacting to an injustice. Whereas when you foster an identity, that might even take decades to form, right? That is how your caste identities have formed over millennia, right? Your religious identities have formed over hundreds of years. But a gender identity, if it needs to be created, it needs to be nurtured over decades. That's why I gave the parallel of something like a Shiv Sena or some of the Dravidian parties where a cross backward caste identity took decades to form because these are not uniform castes. So you needed to coalesce multiple castes that have warred at certain times and say you are all in the same boat because you're backward, right? Economically, socially, politically backward, right? You're not proportionally represented. That took decades to form. The same goes for something like Shiv Sena. Whereas when you give an example of something like AAP, that's reactionary, right? You're reacting to an incident, which is why later on you're wondering what the policies are, and they can be inconsistent, right? They're not along certain identities. They're not consistently, secular, or they're not consistently, backward, pro-backward sections of the population, right? They aren't, because it's not based on identity. It was a reaction to something. So if you want, is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? Well, I would say it's not very probable because historically, both in India and abroad, it hasn't happened. And why? Because it takes decades to nurture at a minimum, to nurture such an identity. And then you have half, and you have contesting identities. Women don't only identify themselves. In a country like India, the other contesting identities are extremely strong and entrenched, right? Women identify themselves as Hindu women. Women identify themselves by their caste and say, I'm a such and such woman, right? So the contesting identities also take space in your head, which means that mobilizing along a single line like caste or religion becomes much easier than mobilizing along gender. It becomes a tertiary identity at that point. Certainly, caste and religious feelings are much stronger than the gender feeling. That's the way that society is made. Politics is a reflection of society.
No, but I can't help feeling that this can be changed. It can, and with proper concerted effort, maybe it will take a decade. I don't know.
Yeah.
And maybe the smart thing to do is to start small, not try to do something as dramatic as trying to win a national election, but maybe a state, maybe a city. But what will it take to do that? And bigger question, why is nobody even trying at a serious level?
In a way, what you're saying is be a regular party. In addition, have a very clear agenda of gender equality and equity for women as a primary plank. In addition to, making sure that water supply works and electricity works and people have jobs and, the economy works well. In addition to all that, also make sure that gender equality is a strong, first order plank. Isn't that what you're saying?
Yes and no, in the sense that to the extent that, say, a Congress or a BJP or an AAP will say everything else is an issue, but I also have this other issue. So by that logic, one can argue that BJP talks development as well.
Correct.
They do.
Nobody talks single things. That is one of the issues here.
So having a party that will, of course, talk a little about all those other issues.
Correct.
But my question is around the primary plank, right?
Yes.
Which is what in marketing terms would call your unique positioning statement or
USP,
unique proposition, selling proposition. We don't have a party for whom gender is the unique selling proposition today.
We have had women's parties before and they're flunked out with no, not even getting say 1% or 0%. Every election, there is one woman's party or something that comes up.
Which would, I would say, typically be a, I mean, I haven't seen any that has been led by a woman who has, or by women who have had a strong track record of
Public,
work, right? Because
yeah,
like
public work.
many political parties are now discovering, for example, BJP, and for a lot of people who are not politically inclined, you might think all this is kya politics ka baat kar rahe hain, but to people like us, this is very important. Like BJP, for example, is realizing that in many states where it is trying to get into, it will take it years to build its own cadre of successful politicians who can win elections, which is why they are allowing Congress
Lateral
to
entries.
join the party, right?
Yeah, lateral entry.
Right and center. Aam Aadmi Party is pretty much taking the same approach in all the states they are going to. Where they're saying we will not, and they've realized that after losing an election badly, that people who do not have that politics and winning an election is a career, just like being a CEO is a career.
Correct.
You need to have a track record in it. You need to know how to win an election.
Correct.
Because being a good human being is not going to help you win an election.
Correct.
But therefore, I mean, is there an opportunity to identify, for example, candidates who consistently been successful, had a long career in politics, but are women, and gradually start building a party around those people, and then try to win?
So are we then saying that we only want half the available vote? We don't want the men's vote? Because what is your selling proposition to men?
No,
what are you
so
saying?
I have 2 points on that. One is that to think that gender is something that only women will vote for is not really correct. I think there is, and although I agree that it might still be a very small percentage of men in India who might say that, like, I personally would more than happily vote for such a party, a women's party. But I just think that there is just so much deep-rooted injustice in this country that needs to change. And, you know, so I would happily vote for a all-women's party, or a party whose primary agenda is to restore gender balance in this country.
Yeah, so that comes back to a party has a basket of offerings it needs to go to the public with.
Correct.
That basket of offerings can't be one offering that says
Correct.
only for women, the rest of you can
Correct.
go to hell,
Correct.
right? So, which means you are a regular party, except that gender justice is your driving plank.
Correct.
Just like Hindutva is somebody else's driving
Correct.
plank, or, you know, Dalit rights is somebody else's driving
Correct.
plank.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So you're a regular party.
Correct.
So there are two ways to approach this problem. One is to say, I'm going to start a new party. X is going to start a new party where gender justice is my primary driving plank. And of course, I need to have commentary. I need to have promises. I need to have a plan around economy, around water supply, around environment, around everything else. Then I go to the public. Then I start acquiring vote from 5% vote all the way until I can get to 30% and somehow win the election. The other way of doing it is to say a whole bunch of us, which is like what you said, which is the tens of thousands of organized women that are fighting for any number of gender equity issues, from wage equity to anti-violence, kind of violence against women. The whole gamut, impressing on the regular parties to say include this in your portfolio and start to pass these laws as well. Right. So there are two ways to accomplish the same thing. It depends on whether you're talking about women themselves leading this. So I go back to the same thing. Yes, you don't have to have only the women's vote. Some men will vote for you, very small percentage, but some men will vote. By the same token, the party doesn't have to be all women. The party can be a lot of women, and you can have men too. In other words,
yes,
the ideal situation for women actually is that your large parties in the country adopt this platform, as opposed to starting from the scratch.
Looks low, right, Tara? The probability of that looks extremely low, isn't it, right now?
The probability of a party actually getting any power, and I'm sorry to say, as amazing as AAP's accomplishments are, they run one city.
I agree. I am absolutely
not. Glorified mayor, right? You're not even in opposition in any state. And you're already talking what, 2013, right, to now, which is 7 years. Right. You're not going to win any state in a hurry. It's going to take a while. Correct. So this is a party that has the whole, everybody is their vote bank. They're not dividing it by a Hindutva, by a, everybody is their vote bank. And it takes this long, 10 years perhaps, to even get to opposition, right? And so the chances of getting these laws, getting the rape law modified through a Nirbhaya, getting the protests, getting the gender wage gap reduced by a set of protests against the or petitions to the finance ministry is much higher than starting a party, getting people, building votes. That is a decades long exercise, especially if you're treading an untrodden path. Nobody in the world has done it. And you're, is it possible? Yes. Is it probable is the question we're talking about, right?
Right.
It's women have not voted only as women.
Yeah, the deep entrepreneurial instinct in me tells me that this is a business opportunity, and
It is.
not a business opportunity in the money making sense of it, but it's an opportunity that whose time has really, really come. Because
Correct.
every time somebody tells you something is not possible is around the time when somebody is going to actually do it. But we can go on like this, Tara. We have a couple of questions, so let me.
Venkat, I want to make one more point. It is
Yeah,
very
please.
often the comment that if you're, if women are not in the banking industry, the answer is not to start a bank. If women are not, in the aviation industry, the answer is not to start a plane. For most women, the answer to successfully being politicians is to actually penetrate the biggest, largest, most winnable parties and say, I want to get there and I want to influence policy. And I don't even want, no, don't just want to influence gender policy. I want to influence policy on everything from finance to mining to environment, right? So if you're a woman aspiring to be in politics, you said recruit a bunch of women with a track record. If you're a woman aspiring to be in politics, then you want to be successful. You want to be successful by working for the largest companies, the largest political parties, right? So there is also a inherent conflict there that says, am I going to leverage my success for a cause, or am I going to leverage my success for the next step of success?
That's the classic, do I want to be an employee or an entrepreneur question? I mean,
yes.
So, do I want to start my own airline or become the CEO of an existing airline question? But, and I have a follow up on that, but I'll come back to it. Let's just get the question. So Terry Samudra is asking this, that, how do we then even address the gender bias and injustice on a day-to-day level if gender is not the primary issue for anybody in this country?
We tend to look at things through monochromatic lenses. As Ambedkar said, it would serve us all well to remember that socio-economic and political axes are sort of the three pillars on which everything stands, right? So why do we have a constitution that says women are equal socially, politically, economically, but in reality, after 70 years, like Venkat, you've been painstakingly pointing out, on none of these axes are women anywhere near equal, right? Economically, women are the poorest within any caste, within any religion, right? And they are significantly poorer. And same goes for politically, we have no power. And socially, you know how patriarchy works, we have no agency. So what he's trying to point out is you can't fix things singularly without fixing the other two, is what he's trying to point out. And he's dead right. If you want to run for political office, you got to have money to run for political office. To have money to run for political office, you either have to have enough income and wealth and assets, or you must have the fundraising ability. To have the fundraising ability, you must have the networks. How am I a woman who's a housewife, XYZ, who's a housewife who doesn't have the networks, but is politically aspirational, has been volunteering her time and can even mobilize and organize people, but she doesn't have the networks to raise money from. So I think how do we ever solve this problem is one of the reasons why women are so organized at the grassroots level, because you make incremental progress, right? Some 10 years back, I led a campaign here in Bangalore to say convicted sex offenders, the local police stations must maintain a list of convicted sex offenders. So if I'm an apartment complex, or if I'm a school hiring a security guard, hiring a swim instructor, I can at least go and check and ask for that list. They may not do it. You can only take the horse to the water, right? And we made it happen, right? At that time, very small thing. This was, one of my first campaigns, and none of us were celebrities or so we end up doing incremental improvements, which are very important, necessary, not sufficient. But how do things ever change? Things move in stepwise increments, and unfortunately, yes, you still have a lot of major issues that continue.
Yeah. Okay, Akanksha is asking, how can we nurture better male allies in politics? And why do we
This
expect
I
only women
Yeah,
to
no,
have a gender
this
agenda?
is no. In fact, I expect male allies in politics. Shakti itself has a lot of men championing the cause, and this is the reason I said it's just another party, except that gender justice is a key plank of that party. Then you serve everybody's interests, and in addition, you primarily serve the interests of gender justice or gender equality. So, which brings us to, you can achieve it in both ways. You can get a Congress to adopt gender equality as a key plank. You can get a BJP to adopt. You can, right? What's the probability that that happens? Which goes back to male allies. If you build enough male allies in the party, you can even get the women's reservation bill passed, which is what happened, and it passed in the Rajya Sabha. You build enough male allies, you can get the rape laws changed, right? If you build enough male allies, you can get child marriage nullified. You can get, all of this has happened. The state governments and central governments have passed a law, so Hindu men and women have equal inheritance rights. That meant that men give up some of their inheritance rights to get it. But in a male majority parliament,
That
we've
came
made
more because of Supreme Court intervention than out of proactive government policy, right?
Well, in states, it was not. So, for example, in the 80s, Andhra Pradesh, NTR passed it, then Karunanidhi passed it. This is in the late 80s and 90s. We are only talking about the union government passing it in 2005. But in
Correct.
states like Andhra and Tamil Nadu, you had it since the 80s and the 90s.
Interesting.
Why did male chief ministers and a male state assembly pass it? Because of it appeals. So, there is a set of conversations, a set of trigger incidents that happened before that. Why did Rajiv Gandhi pass the 33% reservation in all local bodies? That's a remarkable revolutionary thing to do.
Correct.
And it happens at the cost of men giving up their power. And yet they voted for it, not against it. Right? This is where male allies work. This is where I go back to, there are two ways to achieve this. One is to take the existing, this is the same as, do I want to start my bank or do I want to penetrate Citibank, right? So you've got to make that.
So therefore that follow-up question that I'd earlier held back on, which is, with both BJP and Congress at least publicly having a position that they're in favor of the women's reservation bill, why haven't we been able to get it passed in parliament and get 1/3 seats reserved in parliament for?
That's a great question. And I think that is because we need to distinguish between public posturing and real vote bank politics, right? Some things become an issue enough to flip it for your vote bank. So if you look at the history of what Congress has passed or BJP has passed, you will see that, for instance, before the Congress lost in 2014 elections, they actually passed a slew of welfare measures. Okay, in retrospect, even the current government has, without saying it in so many words, acknowledged, taken it forward, and is the linchpin of the current government's welfare policy, whether it is the NREGA or right to food security, any of that stuff. Aadhaar, everything, right? So, but they lost the election. This welfare benefited millions of people, and they lost the election on corruption. Now you take the current government, a lot of what they pass, as against what they say, is around catering to their vote bank, the Hindutva vote bank, right? So this is what happens. The reason they say it and don't do it is because you don't see the excess vote in making that happen. You don't see that incremental vote, that accretive vote to your vote base in making that happen. You see it with the CA, you see it with the lunch.
None of us has data on this, but the assumption is that phase 3 in Bihar turned significantly because of the triple talaq bill, right? I mean, that seems at least to be the argument being made, because phase 3 was entirely Eastern Bihar, significant Muslim population, and yet, although BJP was expected to not do well, they went on to do extremely well in that phase.
No, my information from the ground and analysis based on the data says that phase 3 turned because phase 1 and phase 2 exit polls showed a massive, phase 1 showed a massive swing towards RJD, and phase 2 showed, sort of more of a balance, which means net you're still swinging towards an RJD. And the commentary of Nitish Kumar that said that this is my last election basically said that to the women, and this was a women's vote, right? That said that you're going to get back a government which hasn't had a record of treating women well in terms of Gundaraj, in terms of, so it was a defensive move by women not to say that you do better, but to say that I can't afford to go this far with, is what I've heard. So, yeah, but I'm not sure what is the question that you were trying to ask there.
No, my assumption was that there was a simple, significant positive that a lot of the BJP vote assumption around triple talaq, etc., is that it will help them get a significant chunk of Muslim women's votes.
No, that is entirely wrong. The instant triple talaq criminalization is not passed to get the Muslim women's vote. They will never get it. They will never get the Muslim women vote, no matter what they do. It is passed because it makes Hindu men feel better. You must remember that when you stop, let's say you pass a bill against polygamy, right? You're not going to get the Muslim women's vote. You're going to get the Hindu men's vote. It is the Hindu men that hold most angst against Muslim men's polygamy, right? It is not the Muslim women who are asking for it, right? It is the Hindu men that they are catering to. When the BJP does something, they're doing it for their vote bank. When the Congress does something, they're doing it for their vote bank, right? So it can either be a defensive move or it can be a pro move, but either way, it is for their vote bank.
Okay. By the way, if there are more questions, please send them our way. Ekta is asking, Tara, which parties are most receptive to having women play active role in their parties without having to compromise to get ahead?
I don't think
anybody
and it's not about the party. See, this is the whole issue with gender identity-based politics and why it hasn't happened in the world, because people haven't figured out how to make it a selling proposition. So they're not able to sell it as this alone can get us ahead. And there is not a question of compromise.
No, that's not our question. Our question is which parties are more receptive to having women in the party playing important roles?
Who don't compromise. I think that's what she's trying to ask. Not just women in the party, but women who don't compromise.
Who don't need to compromise.
Who don't need it. And I'm saying there is no such thing. It's like saying I'll join a company to work and I will in public trash the company's policies. You will be fired the next day. And this has nothing to do with politics or parties. Okay. You may disagree. None of us agree. None of us is in perfect alignment with any other individual on earth. And none of us agree with everything our company decides to do or their policies. But what we don't agree with, we shut up about. Right?
Correct.
So if you have a Hathras incident and you see that the women of certain parties are not saying a word about it, that is because they feel strongly about it, but it is because they feel strongly about it. But if they comment about it, they will be fired. Nobody is going to lose their job over one incident. It is very, very, very rare, right? The reason that Harsimrat Kaur resigned from the cabinet is because it is only a move out of the cabinet. It is not a loss of her MP position or being fired from politics. Remember, your entire career will be lost if you did that. So the fact that certain women in politics who in very high places didn't say a word about this only says two things. A, that they actually stood for the right thing. B, they're not willing to lose their jobs and get fired and lose their career over this. Because if they agreed with the party position, they would have voiced the party position.
Right. Meenakshi Gandotra, your question has already been asked by Akanksha, so I'm not going to repeat it. Priyank Samagra is asking a question, why don't, I think is what he meant, why don't existing female political representatives speak on gender justice regularly?
So, I mean, a couple of comments, and this goes back to what Venkat said as well, that, I would ask the opposite. Why is it a women's problem when...
That's the same question that Meenakshi asked as well. And
yeah, why is it a women's problem when there is injustice, right? Why is it always the victim who's... In fact, the victim is least positioned to speak against it. The class of women,
true,
and Venkat started this...
Sorry to interrupt you, but is that true? I mean, when there is Dalit injustice, we do expect the Dalit leaders to speak up the most.
And I'm saying that is the problem with India. That is the problem with India.
Is that universally true? I mean, even for example, the suffragette movement, which got women their voting rights in the US, was led by women. It is the nature of politics that the person who's oppressed has to stand up for their own voice.
No, I am not saying women shouldn't speak against it. What I'm saying is the other, which is that in addition to women speaking against it, unless you have male allies who are the people that wield power, things won't change. Why are there so many protests against rape, but there's been no police reform, no judicial reform? You need to, so there's an expectation that victims alone can change the system is what I'm questioning. Victims need to Yeah, take the lead, just the way, the affected party, whether it is African Americans in the US, whether it is, the native South Africans in South Africa, they can take the lead. But until you have men, until you have people in power, also enough number of allies, you're not going to change the system, right? So that is one of the problems here, is that expecting women alone to take the lead will only go so far.
Right. Okay. So all this is analysis, right? And so more from an actionable point of view, what can we do to change this? Let's say if you want to start even small, is there some clear victories that are possible? So for example, is it practically possible for us to try and get the women's reservation bill passed in this current Lok Sabha before 2024? And what will it
Absolutely.
take to get that done?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm so happy you asked the question about reservation, because the normal thinking about reservation is that, are you asking for a concession? Or are you saying you can't contest on an equal platform, that you want sort of a more raised platform for yourself, right? So first of all, I want to address that and say that reservation is not a concession for the party that you're giving it to. It is actually a fence against encroachment, right? In 70 years, if we were able to achieve gender equality in politics, you wouldn't need it. It is almost the item of last resort. So what you're saying is not, for example, that 33% of seats should be reserved for women. I think that entire narrative is flawed. What you need to say is that no more than 66% seats should be held by any one gender. It's a fence that says, stop playing in my sandbox. Stop encroaching into my space. And why is it my space? Because we are in a representative democracy.
Correct.
And a lot of people have the misconception of may the best man win. This is not, politics is not a meritocracy. Elections are not about merit. Elections are about representation. You
Correct.
elect the person who can most represent your issues. You don't elect the most meritorious person in whatever definition of merit you have. The guy who got 100 on 100 is in best position to represent you. The fisher woman is best positioned to represent the fisher community more than I ever can.
Correct.
So if we get that out of the way, then the reason we are talking about reservations here is because democracy in India hasn't self-regulated to say, I will do the right thing as per the spirit of the constitution, even the letter of the constitution that promises political equality. So now we come to reservation. And I think there are two things that are eminently can be accomplished before 2024. One is to campaign and say that every party must field no more than X% candidates of a single gender. In other words, make sure that the candidates that the party is fielding are themselves representative. Most parties field between 90 to 95% male candidates. So they don't even give tickets, a platform for women to stand for elections, which means there's no question of women winning. In a sense, you've had male reservation for 70 years. Right? Because when you say, where is the voter choice if you reserve a constituency as female, where is the voter choice if you only field, 5%, 6% female candidates? So by saying that, because if you look at the Constitution and the Election Commission rules, a party has to swear on the Constitution to abide by the preamble and the democratic principles in order to get recognition and registration as a party. Having done that, you now can't election after election after election field 90% male candidates. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. So I think bringing in a law, and many countries have done that, from South Africa to Australia, many advanced democracies have done that to make sure that parties don't field all. In fact, BJP, for example, fields no Muslims at all. You can even bring that from a religious angle, but I'm saying the point of the law is not all that. It's just that it's representative, right? That's one law that can be brought. Alternately, you can, and the advantage of you don't reserve constituency.
That we have both a BJP and a Congress, at least with a stated position in favor of the women's reservation bill. What can we do to get that bill passed in the current Lok Sabha?
So that's the second part. You can say, don't do candidates quotas, do constituency quotas, which is the women's reservation bill. Remember, candidate quotas are much more democratic than
I agree.
constituency quotas.
I'm saying either which way, either candidate quota or this way.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that the candidate quotas are eminently achievable. Similarly, women's reservation bill is also eminently achievable, provided there is a massive campaign, public campaign that is launched. Like you rightly pointed out, from your suffrage movements to your anti-apartheid movements, these things have only been achieved by the public getting on the street. Existing establishment hasn't come forward and given it. In India, in a sense, we've been lucky because the constitution on day one was revolutionary enough to make us all equal, and women didn't have to fight for these things. But nevertheless, we are where we are. So if there is a massive public movement towards it, especially given that it is on the manifesto of many, many parties, not just the Congress and BJP, many regional parties have it. And just since they have us in the parliament, no, NCP, everybody has it. Both BJD, TMC, everybody has it in their manifesto. They will all vote for it. So you will actually get a non-partisan coalition of MPs who can vote for it. So we can build a campaign that goes from advocacy, that is a classic approaching each sitting MP to say, will you vote for it, right? And to an actual people's campaign, to persuading the law minister to table a version of the bill. We can actually look at running a campaign, nationwide campaign like that, and ratcheting it up so that it gets passed. It's an eminently doable thing. I just want to say one more thing. In the ideal world, if you wanted women's representation in a way that is most kind of natural, if you will, in a democracy, what you want to do is to move to a proportional representation, not a first past the post system. If you did that, then what you're saying, constructing a party with gender identity as the main plank, becomes eminently doable. Because if I win, 10% of that 50% vote in Bangalore, then I will get 3 assembly seats. If I win 10% of that,
kind of like the electoral college system.
That becomes a boost for the next time to get to 20% vote and 30% vote. So and every advanced democracy has moved to it, except India. We are stuck on the first past the post system, which makes it very majoritarian.
Interesting. Okay, there are a couple more questions. So Meenakshi is asking Tara to create a safe space and to encourage more gender inclusive politics. Is it good to work on a party that has gender lens at the core and brings more women and trans people and men into the party as candidates?
See, the notion that one party can transform India is a little far-fetched for me, right? That is the reason why Shakti, for example, is non-partisan. I think working as a pressure group that makes every party field more women and get more women and make more gender-friendly laws is a better bet than saying one party is not only going to work and do this and win, it'll go on winning and will be able to change the history of India. It's a little far-fetched, which is why also it doesn't happen. Worldwide, we haven't had these kind of parties. I see Lipsa's question as well that says, what are some of the support structures?
Yeah. What are some of the support structures that can be created to make women political aspirants financially sustainable?
And an investment in, I think that's a fantastic question. You have ones like Emily's List in the US that do that and have had enormous success in raising the percentage of women in Congress and Senate. Now we are between 25 and 29% in the US, which is a huge leap forward. They've been at this for 4 or 5 decades now or more, right? So that is another concrete thing, Venkat, just like this, working on a campaign for the women's reservation bill. I think if we had, and this is one of the things we are actually trying as an experiment with ISD and Shakti, trying to see with one of the parties, Shiv Sena in particular, to see if they are, for example, committing to, we want more percentage women running in the next Maharashtra elections. So this is another way to achieve that same goal of gender equality or justice, right? If 4 or 5 major parties can commit to this, then we are trying to work on this to see how do we get those women more ready in terms of electoral campaigns, in terms of fundraising, in terms of building a base and so forth. And in fact, that was one of the goals of Shakti, and we're just starting on it. We'd love to get collaboration and your mind working on it as well to say, how do we build a corpus? How do we build, a campaign material and campaign collateral and campaign strengths, right, that can help them, because women haven't been exposed to the kind of electoral campaigns. Look at Bihar. Every party, every major party held tens of rallies. I challenge you, other than Smriti Irani, find one rally that was addressed by a woman and held by a woman, right? And you're talking about a state where you have something like a JDU, which has repeatedly worked on gender justice instruments, right? So other than Smriti Irani, there is no, so how does a woman know how to organize a rally, right? How to prepare speeches, how to, bring so many people, right? How to, so campaign support is a huge area, and Lipsa is absolutely right. We need to start building that specifically for women. So overall, we can increase the number.
Right. I think about time, I suppose. Prakhar has prakatoed.
Uh,
He wants us to shut up.
no, I think thank you so much. I think this is
But
very.
before that, Tara,
Yeah.
I am going to catch up with you offline on this.
Yeah.
Really, if there's anything I can do, a little bit financially, but a lot more in terms of whatever help I can give to see if we can. I think if in the next 4 years we can get the women's reservation bill in whatever form, representation.
Yeah, it'd be outstanding.
I'd be happy to die after that. I think.
Wonderful. That's so sweet. Yes, if we did that, I think all our lives' work is done. Literally, I mean, you've transformed India. Life's work is done. So that would be fantastic. Let's do that. Let's prepare for that. We have a 3.5 year time frame.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tara and Venkat. And thank you, Venkat, for nudging us to do this and coming up with this idea. I think it was phenomenal. And I would request you both to also go through the comments that have come. And if there's any thing you want to respond to some of the comments, I think it will be great. Indian School of Democracy has recently launched a program called The Good Politician. And that's a 9-month program for political workers. And as an organization, our fundamental commitment is to make sure that 50% people who come in our program are females. So there's a very strong gender inclusiveness that we hold as an organization. Also, our other program that is specifically for women in politics is called She Represents, happens every June. So do watch, give us feedback. And we have people like Tara, Venkat, and many more who support us in making sure that we are on the course and we do what we can do. Thank you so much for joining, everyone.
Prakhar, I need 1 second. I wanted to thank Venkat for pushing this. I really appreciate the way he did this. And, it's wonderful to see so many people committed to this agenda. And we need this tribe to grow and get to critical mass so that we can push something like the Women's Reservation Bill through the Parliament. And thank you. And ISD is, what can I say, my favorite public policy school.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.